Alright, well, now it's time to wire up and solder up the pickups into the guitar. What I'm going to do first is I got my soldering iron heated up. I'm going to put a little bit of, I'm going to tin the pots where I want my wires to solder onto. And it's important that you do this to cut down on the time it takes for the solder to heat up and adhere to the pot. So I've got that one, and here's where a little bit of flux will really come in handy when you put it on the pot, because the flux actually lets the solder flow better. There we go. So those are tinned. A lot of times people will shorten the wires. What I'm going to do with these, just in case I ever want to pull them out of this guitar to use in another guitar, so I'm not going to cut the wires. What I'll do is I'll solder them in place, and then I will fold up the extra and zip tie it to where it doesn't move around. But I do not want to get rid of to cut the wire. In case I ever want to use them in a different guitar. So what I'm going to have to do is I got to strip back the braiding a little bit, and because the braiding is what's going to solder to the pot, and then the wire itself is going to solder to the tab. And I'm also going to be putting in my capacitor tab when I go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip back the wire, the shielding, and then I'll get ready to, once I get the shielding stripped back, I can solder the rest of it in place. Alright, as you can see, I've stripped back the shielding, and I've tinned it, and then I've got my wire tinned for both my pickups. Basically, to trim back the shielding, I just used a hobby knife and cut down one side, pulled it back, and then twisted it so it would stay together when I tinned the ends. Now what I'm going to do is I've got those ready. I've got my capacitor. Remember, we want to have our capacitor installed between the two pickups, or between the volume and tone knob. And we're going to use the center tone position. And what I want to do with this is I want to sit it in there to where I can figure out how much I need to clip off the ends, to where I don't have extra bits hanging out in there. Basically, if you can see there, what I've done is I've got my capacitor situated between the two posts. What I'm going to do is, to keep them from moving around a little bit when I solder the pickups on, I'm going to go ahead and solder them into the tone control, because that's already set and that location's already given. I don't need to change anything with that or put anything else through that hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and solder them into that. And that way, by soldering them in here, it's just going to keep it from moving around on me and make it easier to do the rest of the soldering. I want to make sure my neck goes to my neck volume. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to solder in the leads, the hot end into the lead where the so we'll solder an iron, get a little bit of solder on the tip to help it flow. And now that I got that, I'm going to go ahead and flow in and do the ground portion. Like I said, I've already got both ends tinned. This is where you need that extra set of hands, because I want the, and I'm going to use a little bit of flux to help it flow together. A lot of times if you get that little bit of solder hot and get that initial flow going, it'll flow together better. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little bit on the tip of my soldering gun. my soldering iron. To help it flow, and then my pliers to hold this down for when it gets there we go, it's flowed together. Take the soldering iron off and let it heat. There's one done. My bridge pickup is going to be a little tighter fit. So I'm actually going to tuck it around the volume pot like I did the power wire, and I'll show you in a minute. There's the power wire. And that's the good thing about flux. You don't need a whole lot of it. Just that little bit. And like I said, even though I'm using rosin core solder, I still like to use flux when I'm in those positions because it does go quicker. And the less time you have the iron on your component, the better off you are. Again, use my pliers to kind of hold this down. A little bit of solder on the tip of the gun, on the tip of the iron. And now we're getting flow. Let that heat up. Good. All right, so the cavity's all wired up. Take a look at it here. I've tied back the wire for the pickups. That way if I ever want to reuse them, all I got to do is desolder them. You can see that my capacitors are wired in. Good shiny joints where the ground wires and where all the ground wires are on the pots. That's always a good sign for soldering. When you have that good shiny joint, that means that it was a hot solder. If you have a dull joint, usually means it was a cold solder, it didn't get to the proper heat, and the joint isn't as good as it should be. My capacitors are in. Go ahead and get the covers installed, get it strung up, and make sure everything works.